Alright. Hi, we're going to be talking about automation, which sounds fancy, but is basically just when robots or machines perform tasks that humans usually do. So like a good example would be like driverless cars or like machines in factories in general. And so right now, currently, we're actually seeing the beginning of a pretty huge wave of automation that's affecting a lot of industries. And although the more like precise details of just how big of an impact that'll have tend to vary, with some sources saying that it'll put 50% of jobs at risk and others saying that it'll put 10% of jobs at risk, we still are sure that automation is going to dramatically increase in the coming years. And so the question is, how should we deal with that? But before that, we're going to go into depth on how automation impacts some specific sectors.
So automation in medicine is increasingly developing, and currently over 70% of labs all over the world implement some kind of laboratory automation. So according to the National Institute of Medicine, the use of laboratory automation will become a lot more prominent in the future as the delivery of healthcare will become a lot more efficient. So that way, like, people who have diabetes will no longer have to check their blood concentrations every hour. They can have a sensor implanted that will do that automatically for them. In addition, automations such as the continuous flow analyzer are continuing to develop to make processes in the lab faster, and so that people can get their test results a lot more efficiently and a lot faster.
So when a lot of people think about the environment and automation and industrialization as a whole, they have this misconception of they think about like trash and polluting rivers and things like that. But that's actually not the case. According to Dr. Sujir Kasa, that does research for the Center for Environmental Research, he says that automation is actually built to reduce the effects of environmental pollution based for automation. Now, the main way that it benefits the society is by improving the manufacturing situations. For example, they use renewable resources, such as nuclear, solar, and wind, and this can reduce it up to 250 times the amount of carbon emissions. Additionally, an example can be given with the Coca-Cola bottles. Now, the shape has been improving over the time goes, and for every bottle that's produced, there are millions and millions, and every single bottle that's produced, you're using less resources to construct it. And finally, this can also be shown by something called lights-out manufacturing. Now, lights-out manufacturing occurs when you cut the electricity, cut the water supply, and this helps dramatically because when there's automation, then there aren't people working in the factory. You don't have to support anybody. So this uses less resources as a whole. Now here to talk about economics is Daniel.
Okay, so from an economic perspective, automation is going to provide a massive boost to the economy. And this is because automation creates a lot of productivity. And so to give you a sense of just how much productivity it causes, we can look at some of the past technological revolutions, such as the advent of the steam engine, early robotics, and IT. And then you can see the annual productivity growth. And if you compare that to the current wave of automation, you can see that there's a lot greater productive potential there. And so 0.8 to 1.4% annual growth doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of 50 years, that amounts to 49 to 100% growth, which is pretty significant. It's nothing we've seen historically. And then, okay, so automation creates productivity. So what? Well, productivity is good for a lot of reasons. First, it lowers prices because if you can produce more and you're more efficient, you're going to want to sell more, so you're going to lower prices. Second, it raises incomes because if you're more efficient and you're selling more, you're going to make more money. And then if you're making more money and everything else is priced less, you're going to want to buy more, so it creates greater demand. And then productivity also opens new markets because it sort of redefines jobs and makes them more skill-based. And then the collective effect of all of this is greater economic growth. Now, despite this, there are still downsides to automation, which Fushi will talk about.
So, societal unemployment. As discussed before, automations lead to more risks of job loss. And one factor that contributes to this risk of job loss is the fact that automations are more efficient at doing certain tasks than human labor, which makes them the obvious choice over the human labor itself. And Kim Vicente found that this elevated level of skill underutilization led to the individuals being deprived of the motivation to interact with others and to participate in daily activities. And this social withdrawal in turn can lead to major depressive episodes, can lead to stress and anxiety. And those are just 3 of the chronic disorders that are caused by the risk of unemployment. And Margaret Lin, a professor at Swarthmore College, found that even respiratory and skin diseases can be caused by the risk of unemployment due to automation. And now we have Randolph.
So you might have noticed by now that automation creates some pretty clear winners and losers in the economy. And like any major economic shift, this has political implications too. The future political coalitions are going to be defined by automation. And in Bill Clinton's famous phrase, it's the economy, stupid, that's driving these changes. The first major coalition is tech populists. These are people who see automation in terms of job losses and social stress like Kushi talked about. These people tend to come from Rust Belt areas in factories that are losing jobs to robots. The second coalition, tech progressives. Companies like in Silicon Valley companies, Google and Apple, who are benefiting from automation, who see this as a good change that will increase economic growth the way Daniel talked about. And so this empirically leads to political fracturing. In the 2016 election, votes for Donald Trump, the y-axis, correlated with routine jobs at risk to automation, the x-axis. So you can see that over a study of 3,000 odd counties, it ended up that counties who were more at risk of losing their jobs because of automation tended to vote for populist candidates like Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders.
Okay, and now we are going to talk about what an effective solution would have. It would protect the long-term benefits that automations cause, and it would also get rid of the short-term harms that automations also cause, and it would reconcile tech populism and progressivism.
Now, let's go back to the example we had with the Coca-Cola bottle manufacturing. Let's say that there was this machine that can insanely, a lot of amount of Coca-Cola cap screwing, creates a lot of bottles. So the person that's in charge of monitoring all that gets laid off. So now he doesn't have a job, he goes home. And now the government has implemented a new solution called Universal Basic Income. Now what does this mean? This means that the government is going to give a set amount of money to everybody, not only people that lost their jobs, but also to even the rich people that even own the manufacturing plants. So even though populists and progressives agree with this, and it gives compensation to those that have currently lost their job, in the long run, it doesn't work. Why does it not work? Well, most people go to work so they can earn money and they can invent new things, but if they can just live off of government welfare and they don't have to go to work and get their stuff, get a salary, then it stops innovation and economic growth is stifled.
So another possible solution would be the regulation of automation. And by that, I mean the government should implement laws that will not allow factories to lay off workers as fast. Because as we see, a lot of the automations are replacing people's jobs, and that was like the big con that automation causes. So this would not be a long-term regulation, as factories would only limit the amount of automation that is happening for a short term. So even though workers are not being laid off as fast, this does not increase the innovation and economic benefits that progressives, as Arnav had mentioned earlier, agree with. And this would not be the best solution because, first of all, progressives and populists do not agree on this regulation, and it's more supported by the populists rather than the progressives.
So our third and final solution is one that's already being implemented in European countries like Denmark, and it's called flexicurity, which is a portmanteau of flexibility and security, because it involves both a flexible and secure economy. So the first part of this is a flexible market where the government doesn't interfere with labor, and that means allowing automation to take its course, and if that means unemployment, then allowing that unemployment to take place. But it also means social security to protect these workers who might get laid off because of automation, and creating a robust safety net. The third part of this is job training, where workers who, for the future generations, will have the skills needed to work in this automated economy, either work designing the robots or managing the robots instead of doing jobs that the robots can do themselves. So this would reconcile tech populism and progressivism. It would protect long-term benefits, and it would mitigate short-term harms, but it's not a perfect solution. We can't predict what will happen in the very long term because we don't know exactly how many jobs are going to be automated. We also can't solve for this in the very short term because we can't train everyone in a matter of hours or days to take on new jobs. And finally, this would always require some degree of compromise. So it's not a solution, it's not the perfect solution for anyone, but it's probably the best solution for everyone. Thanks for listening.
All right, guys, so let me ask you a few questions. So Daniel, so describe how the content of the team presentation was changed as a result of conversation.
Okay, so originally we weren't really sure how we were going to do the solutions, and so we were sort of just like proposing what we had found from our research and sort of arguing about it and seeing who thought theirs was the best. But then we started to realize that we had to find a better way to decide on that, so we came up with the 3 criteria that we displayed, which were that it had to reconcile between populists and progressives, and then that it also had to protect long-term benefits and mitigate short-term harms. And I think that ended up working pretty well.
Okay, so, Pranab, describe an argument for one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about the solution.
So before, when I was considered only about the environment, it was like a 1-to-1 ratio, like, oh, there's a lot of industrialization or automation, and then that equals a bunch of trash, pollution, global warming. When I read Arnav's IRR, I saw that there were 2 different sides to populism and progressivism, and it gave me, like, there isn't always a perfect solution to everything, and this gave me a different insight on how various people talk. And additionally, it also gave me a link between my topic and his topic, as populists also try to mitigate environmental benefits, and it like applies to almost every single topic. And then progressivists only look towards economic benefits, and yeah, it creates links between multiple topics.
Okay. So, Arnav, whose paper was the most impactful on your own thinking?
Probably Daniel's paper, because Daniel's paper talked about the economic benefits and harms to automation. So automation creating long-term growth, but also having short-term job loss and unemployment. So this connected to what I was looking at and how people tend to view automation in terms of either unemployment or economic growth. And I saw that these people tended to be the same. So people who lose their jobs are more likely to view automation negatively. So we used that when we were talking about the solutions and trying to create a compromise.
Noor, so now that the project's finished, so what do you think is the gap in the research?
Well, like during this TMP, we were evaluating the good things about automation and then the bad things. But what seems like really interesting to me and that we haven't really covered as much is to see like maybe the different kinds of jobs in automation and like how they're being affected in the future. Because as Arnav stated when we were evaluating our solutions, we don't really know what kind of jobs how jobs are going to be like in the future. We can estimate it, but like really researching the kinds of jobs, so like jobs that have to do more with math and science rather than like teaching jobs, or like the arts and science, and how are those affected by automation, and is there like a link between them? That seems like really interesting to me.
Okay. All right, Kusha. So, what is an example? Whose paper did you decide to exclude, or elements of their paper did you decide to exclude from the presentation and why?
I think we decided to exclude like parts from everyone's present IRR because we decided that some of it was repetitive in some of our IRRs and that it didn't help get our point across and help show what our problem is and why we chose the solutions we did.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys. Dan, you want to do me a